For our next update, we're going to talk about the RTX Nvidia 4060 Ti and 4060. Now, this is interesting when there was, and the information that we have here, this is from one of our sources. We have it in the description. This is leaked information. It is asserted as credible, but just take into account this is leaked information. We're going to talk about three cards: the 4060, the 4060 Ti, which has two versions, one with 8 gigabyte of VRAM and another one with 16 gigabyte VRAM. The amount of wattage required is 165 for the 16 gigabyte versus 160 for the 8 gigabit and gigabyte, excuse me. Now the 4060 takes your 115 watts. Brian, is 5 watts enough for the 16? Are you convinced? Is Nvidia on the right track here with doing this? That's the question. The speculation.
All right. So looking at the big picture here.
Okay, let's look at the big picture.
So speculation was out that a 4060 Ti was going to come out, right? So normally what they'll do is it's going to be pretty much the same card. It's just going to have a slightly better processor. It's what Nvidia's done in the past. A couple of times it's had more memory, but not often. So in this case, what they've done is they had already slated to release the 4060 Ti and the 4060. The specs were out, stuff like that, but they made the mistake in not addressing the community first. Even though this is supposed to be a relatively budget card compared to the other cards of the 4000 line, you still had Nvidia move forward with this 8 gigabyte card. So they had already started manufacturing, and then the gamer community was like, we'd really love to see a 16 gigabyte card. And they go, crap, we can do that. So they go and they do that. And I guarantee you, once the 4060 Ti's 8 gigs sell out, the only people that'll make it from that point on are going to be the budget third-party manufacturers. Because what you're going to end up with is the reference cards are going to be the good cards because those are the only ones that are going to manufacture anymore. And then the 4060, that's just going to be, it's going to be there. But I think the 4060 Ti 8 gig is going to be the hardest one to find after the initial release.
Okay. Interesting. We'll have to come back and see how that plays out, especially in July and then following May. I think it's interesting, though. I don't know if you have a thought on this, but the 4060 Ti releases before the 4060. So did they just try to make something generic to have another option? You would think the 4060 would release and then the 4060 Ti. We've seen that with Ti's releasing after.
They're betting on the fact that the Ti is going to sell out. Whichever card they release first is going to sell out regardless. That's just the way the GPU market is right now. And pretty much anything, including Taylor Swift tickets. Look that story up. That's hilarious. So in essence, what you're getting is Nvidia wants profit before the end of their fiscal year, before they go into the holiday season. They want as much profit as they can get in that quarter. So to beat the clock to the quarter, they're going to release the 4060 Ti, the higher price point. So they're going to sell that. They're going to sell through the stock almost instantaneously. And then in July, they get to save the day by releasing not one, but two cards. And the Ti version is going to be better and probably only about $100 more. So it's a smart move. It's a weird move, but it's a smart move to pad their numbers at the end of a quarter.
Yeah, and I'd like to look at the tests that come out trying to maximize the 16 gigabyte of VRAM with that extra 5 wattage. So that's interesting area for me, at least, to look at. But you mentioned that they may have trouble selling the 4060 Ti with 16 gigabyte because the 8 gigabyte will sell out. So, gentlemen, I have a question for you. How do we solve this problem? What if Taylor Swift tickets were sold with the 4060 Ti with 16 gigabyte? Thoughts on this?
That would probably jump the price $1,000.
Probably jump the price of $1,000. But, they could give a free game as well with the Taylor Swift tickets. They could be a little creative here. get these things
No,
to sell.
but it'll really depend on what the price points are. And the 4060, I don't imagine that card's going to be that expensive. But if the 4060 Ti 16 gig ends up being more expensive than the equivalent spec'd out, AMD card, you're going to see a lot of people upset.
Now let's talk about AMD. Brian, you follow AMD avidly, and we've seen this pattern of Nvidia pushing out cards more frequently than usual. I at least would argue it is AMD making them sweat. Is that part of the reason that they are trying to push these out, or is that just a separate situation?
It's twofold.
Okay.
One, it's a reactionary response. Time and time again, AMD's come out, with the same year of their graphics cards, and they've been dunking on Nvidia in all the best ways. Not only on price for what you're getting, the performance of the card, even in some cases the thermal performance, and they fit in most cases. So I mean, when you smack all that together, it's kind of like Nvidia has to do something to get profit. And what they're doing is they get to go, hey, let's release all of these SKUs, confuse the living hell out of people, make them think they're getting a deal, and push these cards out, and the scalpers will buy them anyway, so Nvidia is going to get their profit regardless. The scalpers
it is confusing. I won't call myself a subject matter expert in the Nvidia graphics cards. I at least try to follow, keep up, understand what Nvidia, AMD are doing. So yeah, it is perhaps a tactic, like you said, to be different.
It's the same thing Apple does with Samsung.
Okay.
So Samsung has a couple of size variants of their phone. There's really not that many models of a Samsung Galaxy phone. And then you look at Apple. Apple's got the SE. They've got and then whatever year it is, you've got your potentially a mini, which they just discontinued, your regular phone, your larger version of that phone, then the Pro, then the larger version of the Pro, and then now you're going to have the Ultra. So you're talking like 5 or 6 SKUs for one phone. It's the same thing. You give people a bunch of different options as opposed to 3, and they're going to tend to try to go for more options because it's more flexible with pricing. If you don't have the extra $50 to put to this card, you might get this card but you weren't even looking at the competitor AMD because they just have 3 price points mainly.
It makes sense to me, gentlemen. What do you think? Does it make sense? I take the silence as...
I don't think that any of these cards are really worth getting. I'm personally waiting for the 50 series before I even think about upgrading. But that's just my personal preference there.
That's a great point, Richard, because it depends on what the individual is buying it for. Do they expect the 4060 Ti or even the 47, which we talked about in episode 2, to be this ultimate 4K card? Is the person interested in 2K gaming? The 4070, based on, I think it was PC Gamer in episode 2, we talked about that. The verdict was it's a great gaming card for 2K. I don't know if we can expect that for the 4060 Ti or just a very expensive card that does great with high definition gaming. But to your point, yeah.
I'll tell you what, I think that 4060 Ti 8 gig is probably going to have a niche as a mining card, because that spec for spec, it's almost identical to where the 1080 Ti was.
Now that's interesting.
And the 1080 Ti is still one of the best mining cards you can buy.
I read in the past that Nvidia has enforced some controls to prevent cards from being used for mining, and I don't have those details in front of me. Have you heard about that? Or I'm inclined to believe there's a way to circumnavigate that.
They only lock out certain SKUs.
Okay.
So typically it's the high performance
battery
cards,
low.
cards that they're pushing are the ones that are locked out. There are also third-party drivers that are made for more of the budget cards that will override the NVIDIA lockouts. But there's a lot of different defeat mechanisms out there. But I don't condone doing this, and it's not the views of the channel.
Understood. Yeah, but it's a possibility that this may occur, and that may be the niche for them. So, objectively speaking, yeah, that would be an interesting development. We will have to look for that in future daily gaming updates as well as last week in gaming episodes. All right, that is our update for the 4060 and the 4060 Ti. Okay, gentlemen,